Of OpenAI was fired by the board and subsequently hired by Microsoft. He was then reinstated at OpenAI, in which Microsoft has a 49% stake, following a staff revolt. The CMA said it wished to determine whether those events had resulted in a relevant merger situation, and if so, the impact that the merger could have on competition in the UK. The house builder Berkeley Group has warned that the biggest risk facing the industry's supply chain was that of contractor insolvency, as inflation starts to fall and demand for construction services reduces. The UK's second biggest house builder by stock market value said it expects the UK housing market to remain subdued until there is more confidence among buyers that interest rates are heading lower. Berkeley Group was reporting a pre-tax profit of £298 million for the 6 months to the end of October, up 4.6% on the same period last year. The shares have fallen by more than 3% this afternoon. And the UK's main financial watchdog and the Treasury laid out proposals today aimed at making it more affordable for less well-off consumers to save and invest. There have been concerns that such consumers are deterred from saving and investing because they cannot afford to pay for financial advice, the provision of which is regulated and attracts fees. A recent survey by the FCA found that only 8% of UK consumers received full financial advice in 2022. Well, the proposals would enable savers to receive a new form of simplified advice, making it easier for banks, insurers and investment firms to provide affordable personal recommendations to clients with smaller sums to invest. Now, few people have had a career as inspiring as that of Sir Frank Chapman. The son of a lorry driver from London's East End, he attended a secondary modern school in Canning Town before becoming a high flyer at BP and Shell, going on to run BG Group, the FTSE 100 gas giant, for 12 years. But his post-business life has been just as inspiring. Sir Frank was diagnosed with myeloma, an incurable blood cancer, in 2010 and was initially given between 3 and 5 years to live. He's now helping to fund a £100,000 research project led by the charity Myeloma UK into the possible link between myeloma and heart issues. I've been speaking to him.
The partner is the George P. Livanos Foundation. There is a business run by Ceres, run by Peter Livanos, and he and the George P. Livanos Foundation have agreed to fund something 50-50 with me to look at coronary circulatory disorders in myeloma patients to find out if that is a facet actually of myeloma, the disease itself, or whether it's something to do with the various new treatment protocols that are being implemented. And there are a number because, there's great progress being made by clinicians and researchers around the world, improving the array of treatments available for multiple myeloma.
There's a very personal reason why you wanted to look at the links potentially between myeloma and heart issues, isn't there?
Almost 2 years ago, I had a heart attack, and it was very unexpected. And it was quite a serious heart attack. And I survived that, and I'm well on the road now to restoring all of the previous functions. But it made me realise that we don't really understand if these coronary circulatory disorders have anything at all to do with myeloma. And the real goal here is to establish within Myeloma UK, an institution that I used to work with as vice chairman, we want to establish a research chair, a research fellow rather, that's going to gather all of the information and do some research into what is actually known about these effects. I mean, everyone knows that a heart attack is a fairly significant event in your life. And if we can take the myeloma patients who are already struggling with, some of them greatly with the disease itself, and help them to cope with a possible extra challenge, if you like, just around the corner, then that would be research well directed.
Well, it's good to see you looking so well now, Frank, I must say. You mentioned just now there are a lot of clinical advances into myeloma. What more are we learning about the condition right now?
It is an incurable disease at present, and for some, about 3,000 people a year die of myeloma and the struggle they've failed to manage. And, you know, that's very, very sad, of course, indeed. But, you know, some of the advances that are being made are very interesting. Monoclonal antibodies is an amazing artificially engineered piece of DNA which can be circulated in your body and take a role as an antibody to combat, you know, the overproduction of malignant cells. So, you know, those types of things, understanding a little bit about the genomic types of myeloma. Some are much more aggressive than others. So having an understanding of that is also extremely valuable. Also on the ability of clinicians and researchers to deploy a solution developed for one malignancy to another area. That is changing potentially the chance of success that can be achieved by progressive research programs. And if we can manage to continue that, it could change quite dramatically the chance of success and therefore the successful application of funds to generate new cures for a range of different malignancies. So there are quite a few exciting things.
Obviously, you spent your entire career in the oil and gas industry. I'd love to know how you think the industry is handling the transition to net zero, and in particular, the contrasting approaches between the US and Europe.
The issue is that there is a difference in understanding about what transition actually means. You can't flip in a year from one system to another, and that would bring the industry and the economies of the world to their knees. So we have to think about two things, really. One is to use progressively cleaner fuels. So we would choose to use gas rather than coal. And also to have a properly engineered, properly thought through transition profile.
BG, there were some big blockbuster discoveries during your time at the helm. Do you think we're going to see gas discoveries of that kind of order in the future?
The enormous amount of gas that's found in tight reservoirs and coal seam reservoirs is enormous. And, you know, the potential for the lower 48 still to be producing tens of millions of tons feedstock per annum for LNG production, I think that is going to provide a significant wedge of output for the future. I'm very optimistic about the role of LNG, as I was when I was leading BG Group, because it is a relatively clean fuel, and it does give the opportunity to transition away from some of the dirtier fuels and to really get a step on the ladder and move this thing forward. I mean, I think the other thing that we need to say very clearly is the industry can't be complacent. It can't assume that everyone will understand this and go along with it. The industry needs to work very hard indeed, to make sure that there's an understanding of what the industry is trying to do in terms of transition. And not everyone, in that sense, is on the same page yet.
That was Sir Frank Chapman, truly inspiring figure. Now, the space race is an expensive business, but one British company based in Farnborough in Hampshire is hoping to change all that. Alto Haps, a subsidiary of Airbus, is the world leader in stratospheric technology. It's produced a high-altitude solar-powered aircraft, which it says is both carbon neutral and affordable. The Zephyr, which has the wingspan of an A380 Super Jumbo but weighs less than the average British adult, is due for commercial launch in 2025. All joining me now in the studio is Sama Halami. He's the chief executive of Alto Haps. Sama, good to see you this afternoon.
Thank you.
How many of these aircraft do you expect to produce at the outset?
So we have already produced 10 of them, and we have 2 on the line today. But eventually, within a few years, we're going to have hundreds of these things flying across the whole globe, providing communication services and Earth observation services to people that are in rural and remote areas and in different places in a completely sustainable way.
I mean, you've given me a flavour there of the kind of applications that it's going to be used for. Who do you think the biggest customer is going to come from?
So we're going to have multiple customers, but the aim of the project is to basically improve people's lives. We're going to do that in a way that is not contradicting with with the benefit of the planet. So we're doing that in a way that is very kind to the planet. But the idea is that you have a lot of communities out there that are underserved or unserved today. And today's technologies, either the terrestrial technologies or even satellite-based technologies, are not able to serve them in a way that is either economical or technically possible. With HAPS, we are able to create an alignment between technology and the economics to serve those markets. So we will be serving the underserved or unserved today in rural and remote areas on one hand. On the other hand, we'll be doing Earth observation services for applications like forest fire management, disaster management, precision agriculture, increasing crop yields. So a wide, diverse user base.
OK. I mean, I've seen it suggested it could also be used for espionage as well.
Well, look, I mean, it's eyes in the sky, but the eyes in the sky can be for applications that are very civil government in nature. Those provide a good service to humanity.
I gather these are going to be manufactured in Kenya. Why is that?
So our base is Farnborough. This is where we are basically Britain is taking the word stratospheric from Farnborough. And we have a number of engineers. We have 160 people today in Farnborough. We were 80 just last year, and we're growing from Farnborough. We are going to be based in different places around the world and have hubs from where we launch those aircrafts. As you mentioned, the aircraft is a very light aircraft, much lighter than I am. And it loves to stay in the stratosphere. The stratosphere is, by the way, is 60,000 feet to 80,000 feet. It's not designed to do very well, on the way to the stratosphere or down. So we need places with really good weather to access the stratosphere, and Kenya is such a place.
And how much will you sell these aircraft for?
So we haven't, of course, talked about the economics of it yet. We are in the industrialization phase of those aircraft. But what's worth noting is that, to serve an area with an aircraft, the aircraft serves about 7,500 square kilometers on the ground. And that's equivalent to about 250 towers from the ground. We can do it, with the cost of a handful of towers. So it's ideal for those areas where you don't deploy towers because it's uneconomical to do so.
And who do you think you're competing with?
So look, I mean, I don't think we're competing with anyone. We have a niche, a layer, or if you want, a frontier in connectivity that is new. So you have satellite that is high up, you have terrestrial networks that are over here, and we're in between. We fulfill a need and an alignment of technology and economics that neither of those two can for the rural and remote areas. So I think we sit in a space by ourselves, a new frontier.
And for how long can the Zephyr stay in the stratosphere? So
that's the beauty of HAPS. The idea of HAPS was not new, but the battery technology is now allowing us to have aircraft like this stay for a month at a time. Today we're looking at 90 days, but we're pushing next year into the 200 days and beyond that.
So that will depend on the speed with which the battery technology is evolving.
Exactly, and thanks to the auto industry, which is helping push in that direction, battery technology is becoming really, really good.
Very interesting that, I mean, you're a subsidiary of Airbus, but I gather the intellectual property behind this was devised here in the UK.
Yes, it was. I mean, Airbus has been doing this project for about 20 years. It started as a vision from Chris Kelleher, a Brit. But Airbus builds great aircraft, and they build Zephyr, which is an amazing, amazing aircraft. If you come to Farnborough, it's a just massive piece of engineering. And then you look at it, and then we said, what do we do with it now? And how do we develop a services business that helps this planet and humanity? And that's the idea of Alto. So Alto was created for that purpose.
OK, well, Sam, it's good to talk to you today. Best of luck with the commercial launch. Hope to see you again in the future. Thank you. Well, the pound is heading for its first weekly loss in 4 against the US dollar, and that comes obviously on the back of the monthly US jobs data. As you can see there, the dollar has appreciated throughout the afternoon on the back of the non-farm payrolls numbers. The pound currently off by nearly 0.5% on the session against the dollar. It's more or less unchanged against the euro. The single currency likewise off against the dollar by similar order. Well, in the equity market, stocks in Europe are going into the weekend on a positive note. There you go. All of the main continental European indices have finished in positive territory. The DAX is pretty well close to the all-time high that it hit on Wednesday. Talking points this afternoon include the Belgian power transmission operator Elia, which is up some 7% in Brussels, and that is on news that results for the year are going to be better than expected. Well, here in London, likewise, the FTSE 100 has finished the session in positive territory. That's nearly a two-month high, I think, right now. FTSE finishing up just over half of 1% higher, led by some of the big heavyweight dollar earners, the likes of AstraZeneca, BP, Shell and Diageo. There you go. You can see all of those stocks finishing in positive territory this afternoon. The biggest percentage gainer, though, today has been Antofagasta, the Chilean copper miner, up by just nearly 4.25%. That follows positive broker comment. To the downside, the minor Anglo-American is leading blue chip fallers. Look at that. That is a huge sell-off on the session, 19% nearly. That's after it unveiled planned production cuts this year and or next year and in 2025. While the home builder Barclay Group mentioned them earlier in the programme, they're off 4% on their results statement. Outside the FTSE 100, watchers of Switzerland remains wanted. That's after yesterday's trading update, some 6.25% higher, while IG Group has risen by nearly 4%. That's after it named the former Paddy Power chief executive, Breon Corcoran, as its next chief executive. We had him back on the programme back in 2014, I think. Breon, if you're watching, we'd love to have you on again in the near future. As for the oil price, well, yesterday that hit its lowest level since the 29th of June. It's rallied slightly from that today. Currently, a barrel of Brent crude will cost you $75.57 a barrel. That's up a little over 2% this afternoon. Well, joining me now is Michael Field. He's European market strategist at Morningstar. Michael, good to see you today. The non-farm payroll figures were unexpectedly strong. It shows, I guess, the US economy still has real momentum behind it. Michael,
I think that's fair, Ian. Yeah, look, they came in ahead of expectations by about 50. Hello. Yes, indeed, the non-farm payrolls, they came in, ahead of expectations, which is always a positive. I think, you take it with a pinch of salt that if you look back a year or two ago, the figures were much higher. So definitely the Fed and the route it's taken is definitely kind of slowing the economy. But at the same time, getting a good number today really feels like we're pushing towards that soft landing, which is exactly where we wanted to be.
I mean, the bond market obviously reacted to this, as does the dollar. Equities in the US this afternoon, more or less unchanged.
They are. I saw that as well. We'd expected maybe a slight little bump today on the back of that kind of positive news. But taking it in context, if you look at where the S&P is, for instance, we're almost at all-time highs again. We're just off that mark. So I think, yes, it's been good news, but also investors have been kind of pricing this in slowly over the last while, I think also.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting the way, looking at how some of the news outlets wrote up the figures when they dropped. Some people say, well, this makes pushes into the distance the date of the first US interest rate cut. Others saying, it actually points to because the number was better than October but weaker than September. It points to potentially the economy losing a bit of momentum.
You could definitely look at it in two different ways, but the way I see it is that the number was kind of in that Goldilocks porridge territory, that it's not too strong, that we're going to get worried about the economy overheating again and, push out rate increases further. And it wasn't so weak that we're actually physically worried about the economy kind of crashing as of next year. So I think when you look at the economist estimates going forward, it does seem, and not just with the Fed, you can look at this with Europe as well, or the Bank of England, it does seem like rate cuts are more likely to happen now, maybe Q2 next year, which is a big positive, I think, for businesses and consumers who've been really struggling with those high rates.
Q2 next year, by that you mean the US, the European Central Bank, you mean the Bank of England as well, potentially?
Indeed. I think they're all in a similar boat. They've all been combating inflation. We've had those kind of double-digit rates across the Western world and the end of 2022, and they've all done a reasonable job of actually getting them down. So I think, they might not fall exactly in tandem with each other, but they're certainly looking to be going in the right direction anyway with interest rate cuts next year, hopefully.
What do you think about the way that sterling dollar cable has traded this week? Sterling has been on a real tear against the dollar over the last month or so, and it's given back a fair bit of those gains this week.
It has. And I think what's happening there is this kind of way in which investors are trying to figure out and trying to, put together exactly the pace of interest rate cuts, which is going to be the big kind of catalyst from the US, the Fed, and then the Bank of England also. And I've just said that the central banks will be cutting rates in the same direction, that we know they're going to go down next year, hopefully. But the actual pace of them and the magnitude of those cuts as well is the unknown part at the moment. And I think what's happening with, bond yields at the moment in those individual countries, and indeed the exchange rate, the cable rate that you pointed out, is just investors trying to get a better handle on exactly the pace of which that's going to happen.
Yeah, and in the meantime, I mean, it seems to me we're starting to see companies putting out increasingly cautious trading updates about the current environment. I mean, Anglo American, very good example of that today, and also Barclay Group, the house builder.
Yeah, huge move with Anglo American, all right. What I would say is that, we're faced with this situation now where interest rates should be coming down next year, which is a huge positive. But what we can't forget as well is that interest rates we have today are 15-year highs. And that actually does have to have an impact on businesses and consumers, and that's feeding through. So if you look at our forecast, for example, for the US economy next year, it's going to fall relative to 2023. So a lot of that pain that built up with high interest rates is still feeding through. So you can probably expect a little bit more of that from the company statements, as you mentioned.
All right, Michael, got to leave it there. Thanks very much for joining me this afternoon. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that's it from me for today. Have a very good weekend. Thanks very much for joining me. Cheerio.